What if the hardest part of building a life in America isn't language, money, or culture, but learning how to truly understand the person you love? I used to think our differences were slowly breaking us. But what if those same differences could become our greatest strength? This is my real story, about love, conflict, family, and the quiet moments that changed everything. Broken English, hidden distance. What if the real reason your relationship feels heavy isn't love fading, but understanding failing, quietly, day after day? That question didn't hit me in a dramatic moment. No shouting. No doors slammed. It came on a random Tuesday night, standing in my kitchen in America, holding a spoon, staring at a pot of soup that tasted wrong. Not bad. Just not right. Kind of like how my marriage felt at the time. You know that strange feeling when everything looks fine from the outside, but inside, something is slightly off? Like watching a movie where the sound is just a second behind the image. That was us. We were talking every day, living together, raising a child, but somehow, we weren't really hearing each other. And the worst part? It didn't look like a problem. It looked like a normal life. Here's the thing nobody tells you about building a mixed culture family in America. It's not the big differences that wear you down. It's the tiny ones. The invisible ones. The ones that repeat every single day until your brain gets tired of translating, guessing, adjusting. Your brain, by the way, hates that kind of effort. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive load. It basically means your brain has limited energy, and when you use too much of it trying to understand small things, tone, intention, hidden meaning, you burn out faster than you expect. Not physically. Emotionally. That's exactly what was happening to me. A simple sentence like, "It's fine," could mean 10 different things depending on tone, culture, mood, and timing. In my culture, we often soften things, avoid direct conflict. In my partner's culture, honesty is clearer, more direct. So when she said, "It's fine," I believed her. But it wasn't fine. And slowly, without either of us realizing it, those tiny misunderstandings started stacking up like invisible bricks between us. You might think, okay, just communicate better. Sounds easy, right? That's what I thought too. But here's where it gets tricky. When you're speaking in a language that isn't your first, you don't just lose words. You lose speed. You lose timing. You lose the ability to respond emotionally in the moment. By the time I found the right sentence in English, the moment had already passed. The feeling had already changed. So instead of saying something imperfect, I said nothing. And silence is very good at pretending to be peace. There's actually research showing that unresolved emotional tension doesn't disappear, it just goes underground. Your brain keeps it, your body stores it, and over time, it changes how you react, even when you don't notice it consciously. I didn't notice it at first. But I started feeling tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from constantly thinking, did I understand that right? Or, did I say that correctly? Or worse? Did I hurt her without knowing? Now imagine doing that every single day. In your own home. with the person you love. It changes you. I remember one evening, we were sitting at the dinner table. Our child was talking, laughing, switching between two languages effortlessly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And I just sat there, smiling, but inside, I felt like an outsider in my own family. Isn't that strange? You build a life, a home, a family, and still feel like you don't fully belong in the conversation happening right in front of you. That moment stayed with me, because it forced me to face something uncomfortable. Maybe the problem wasn't just language. Maybe it was how I was using it, or avoiding it. There's a common mistake people make when learning English, or any language, really. They think the goal is to be correct. Perfect grammar. Perfect pronunciation. Perfect sentences. But real life doesn't wait for perfect sentences. Real life happens in messy, emotional, fast-moving conversations where people interrupt, misunderstand, react, and expect you to feel with them, not just speak correctly. And I wasn't doing that. I was translating, calculating, editing myself, which meant I was always one step behind. And in relationships, being one step behind feels like being far away. So little by little, I started pulling back. Not on purpose. Just, naturally. Like your brain trying to protect itself from overload. Less talking. More nodding. More, it's okay. More, I understand. Even when I didn't fully understand. From the outside, I probably looked calm. Easygoing. No conflict. But inside, I was slowly disconnecting. And here's the ironic part. I moved to a country known for communication, openness, self-expression, and somehow, I was becoming quieter than ever. That's when the real questions started forming in my mind. Not, how do I improve my English? But, how do I stop losing connection with the people I love? Because at the end of the day, language isn't just about words. It's about connection. It's about being seen, being understood, being felt. And if you lose that, even perfect English won't save your relationship. That night in the kitchen, staring at that, almost right, soup, I realized something simple but uncomfortable. We weren't failing because we were different. We were struggling because we didn't know how to turn those differences into something useful. Something stronger. Something that could actually bring us closer instead of pushing us apart. And I didn't have the answer yet. But I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't change something soon, silence would slowly replace everything we once had. And silence, unlike arguments, doesn't give you a warning before it takes over. It just grows. Quietly. A normal day feels complicated. Have you ever lived a completely normal day, and still felt like something was quietly falling apart? That's the part no one prepares you for. Not the big fights. Not the dramatic moments. But the ordinary Tuesday mornings that somehow feel heavier than they should. The kind of day where nothing is wrong, yet everything feels slightly out of place, like wearing someone else's jacket that almost fits, but not quite. Our life in America looked simple from the outside. Wake up early. Make breakfast. Get our child ready. Talk about work. Plan dinner. Smile. Move on. A normal family. But inside that normal day, there were dozens of tiny moments where things didn't quite land the way they were supposed to. It started in the morning. She liked things fast. Efficient. Direct. Coffee ready. Questions clear. Decisions quick. I liked things softer. Slower. A little space before speaking. A little pause before reacting. So when she asked, "Are you ready?" what she meant was, "Let's go now." And when I answered, "Almost," what I meant was, "Give me a moment to finish what I'm doing." But what she heard was, delay. And what I felt was, pressure. Nothing big happened. No argument. No tension you could point at. Just a tiny mismatch. But here's where it gets interesting. Your brain doesn't ignore these mismatches. It records them. Quietly. Repeatedly. There's a concept called microstress accumulation. It means small, barely noticeable stressors, like miscommunication, tone differences, or timing mismatches, build up over time and create emotional fatigue. Not explosion. Fatigue. And fatigue is dangerous because it doesn't shout. It doesn't warn you. It just slowly drains your ability to care, to respond, to stay present. That morning, I felt it again. We were driving. Our child in the back seat, talking non-stop, mixing languages like it was a game. English, bits of my native language, bits of hers. Laughing. Free. Effortless. And we were quiet. Not angry. Just quiet. I remember looking out the window, watching the streets pass by, and thinking something strange. How can a life look so stable, and feel so unstable at the same time? Because here's the truth about mixed culture families in America. You don't just live one life. You live in layers. One layer is practical. Jobs, schedules, responsibilities. Another layer is emotional, how you express love, frustration, care. And then there's the invisible layer, values, habits, expectations you didn't even know you had until someone else does things differently. That invisible layer? That's where most problems live. And that day, I started noticing it everywhere. At lunch, she said, "You should try this new place. It's really good." Simple sentence, right? But in her tone, it sounded like a suggestion. In my mind, it felt like a decision already made. So I said, "Okay." But inside, I was thinking, did I have a choice? Now flip that. Later, I said, "Maybe we can stay home tonight." In my tone, it was a suggestion. In her mind, it sounded uncertain. Like I didn't really care. So she said, "If you don't want to go out, just say it clearly." And suddenly, a normal conversation felt complicated. Not because of what we said, but because of what we meant. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. We weren't arguing about actions. We were reacting to interpretations. And interpretations are shaped by culture more than language. You can have perfect English and still misunderstand everything. Think about that for a second. Because most people believe improving English will fix communication. But real communication is not just vocabulary. It's rhythm. It's tone. It's expectation. It's what your brain assumes before the other person even finishes speaking. And in a mixed culture relationship, those assumptions don't match by default. They have to be learned. That afternoon, I tried to pay closer attention. Not just to words, but to reactions. When I spoke, I watched her face. When she spoke, I listened for intention, not just meaning. And something strange happened. I started realizing how often we were both slightly confused, but pretending not to be. Because stopping to clarify every small thing feels exhausting. So instead, we guess. And guessing works, until it doesn't. There's actually a psychological shortcut your brain uses called predictive processing. It means your brain doesn't just receive information, it predicts what's coming based on past experience. So when she spoke, my brain filled in gaps using my cultural background. And when I spoke, her brain did the same. Which means, we weren't always talking to each other. We were often talking to our own expectations of each other. That's why normal days felt complicated. Because every interaction had two layers, the words, and the interpretation. And those two didn't always match. By the evening, I felt drained. Again, not from anything dramatic. Just from the constant, quiet effort of adjusting. Adapting. Translating not just language, but meaning. We sat down for dinner. Same table. Same routine. Our child laughing, telling a story about school, switching languages mid-sentence without even noticing. And I watched that, carefully. Because there was something there I hadn't fully understood before. Our child wasn't confused. There was no hesitation. No overthinking. No fear of saying the wrong thing. Just natural switching. Natural understanding. Two cultures. One flow. And that's when it hit me. Maybe the problem wasn't the differences. Maybe it was how I was holding on to them. Tight. Careful. Afraid to get it wrong. While our child just moved through them freely. No pressure to be perfect. No need to choose one over the other. Just connection. That idea stayed in my mind as the night went on. Because if a child can navigate two worlds without stress, then maybe the real issue isn't complexity. Maybe it's how adults overcomplicate it. Before going to bed, she said something simple. Today was long. I nodded. Yeah. But this time, I didn't just hear the words. I heard the feeling behind them. Tired. Not frustrated. Not angry. Just tired. Same as me. And for the first time that day, something felt aligned. Not perfect. But real. And I realized something small, but powerful. We weren't as far apart as it felt. We were just slightly out of sync. Like two people dancing to the same song, but hearing it a little differently. And maybe, just maybe, we didn't need to change the music. We just needed to learn each other's rhythm. When love sounds different. What if the reason you feel unloved is not because love is missing, but because it's being spoken in a language you don't recognize? That realization didn't come from a book. It didn't come from advice. It came from something much simpler, and much more uncomfortable. A moment when I thought I was showing love, and she felt nothing. Let me take you into that moment. It was late. The kind of late where the house is finally quiet. Our child asleep. The lights dim. The day slowing down. I was tired, but in a calm way. Like I had done enough. Like I had shown up. I cleaned the kitchen. Washed the dishes. Prepared things for the next morning. In my mind, that was love. Practical. Quiet. Responsible. So when she walked in and didn't react the way I expected, no smile, no thank you, no soft moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Disappointment. A quiet voice in my head said, "Didn't she see what I just did?" Now here's the twist. At almost the same time, she was feeling something too. Not appreciation. Distance. Later, she said something that stayed with me. "You were here, but I didn't feel you." Think about that. I was physically present. Doing things. Helping. But emotionally? Invisible. And that's when it started to make sense. Love doesn't just exist. It's expressed. And expression is deeply shaped by culture, habits, and personal history. There's a concept you might have heard of, love languages. Not in a cliché way, but in a very real, psychological sense. People tend to give and receive love in different forms: actions, words, time, touch, attention. But here's what's often missed. In mixed culture relationships, it's not just different types of love. It's different interpretations of the same action. To me, doing things, cooking, cleaning, fixing problems, meant I cared. In my background, love is often shown through responsibility. Through sacrifice. Through making life easier for the people you care about. You don't always say it. You prove it. But for her, love needed to be felt in the moment. Through eye contact. Through presence. Through words that connect, not just actions that solve problems. So while I was in the kitchen, thinking, "I'm taking care of us," she was in the living room, feeling, "He's not really here with me." Same night. Same house. Two completely different emotional experiences. And neither of us was wrong. That's the dangerous part. Because when both people feel right, and still feel disconnected, confusion starts to grow. The next day, I paid attention to something I had ignored before. Tone. Not just what we said, but how we said it. She would say, "Come sit with me." Simple sentence. But in her tone, there was warmth. Invitation. A quiet need for connection. And sometimes, I would answer, in a minute. Logically, that makes sense. Emotionally, it can feel like rejection. Not because of the words, but because of the timing. There's actually research showing that emotional connection often depends on what psychologists call bid, small attempts to connect, like a question, a look, a comment. And how you respond to those bids matters more than you think. Turn toward it, and connection grows. Miss it repeatedly, and distance builds. I realized I had been missing those bids. Not on purpose, but because my attention was focused on tasks, not moments. Fixing things instead of feeling things. And here's where culture quietly plays a role again. In some cultures, efficiency is valued. You handle responsibilities first, emotions second. In others, connection comes first. You pause, respond, engage, even if nothing productive is happening. Neither is better. But when they collide without awareness, friction happens. That evening, I decided to try something different. Nothing big. Just small changes. She said, "Come sit with me." And this time, I didn't say, "in a minute." I stopped what I was doing. Sat down. Looked at her. No perfect sentence. No plan. Just presence. And something shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The conversation that followed was simple. Random. Light. But it felt closer. Like we were finally in the same space, not just physically, but emotionally. And here's what surprised me. I didn't need perfect English for that moment. I didn't need complex sentences or perfect grammar. I just needed to be there. Fully. There's a tendency, especially when you're not confident in a language, to hide behind silence until you can say something right. But connection doesn't wait for perfection. It responds to sincerity. Eye contact. Tone. Attention. Those things carry meaning beyond words. That night, I understood something I wish I had seen earlier. I wasn't failing at love. I was just expressing it in a way that didn't always translate. And translation takes effort on both sides. But it starts with awareness. Because once you see the difference, you can't unsee it. You start noticing everything. The way she laughs at certain moments. The way her voice softens when she's tired. The way a simple, "How was your day?" can mean I care, not just I'm asking. And slowly, you begin adjusting. Not changing who you are, but expanding how you express it. That's the key. Not replacing your culture, but learning how to bridge it. Because love, in a mixed culture family, isn't automatic. It's built. Moment by moment. Misunderstanding by misunderstanding. Adjustment by adjustment. And if you're willing to learn that process, something powerful happens. You stop asking, "Why don't they understand me?" And start asking, "How can I help them feel me?" That shift changes everything. Because love doesn't fail in silence. It fades in misinterpretation. And once you learn to hear the difference, you realize something surprisingly hopeful. Maybe love was there all along. It just sounded different. Dinner table culture clash. What if the place that's supposed to bring your family closer is quietly revealing everything that's pulling you apart? For us, it was the dinner table. Not arguments. Not big conflicts. Just dinner. You'd think a meal is simple. Sit down. Eat. Talk. Relax. But in a mixed culture family, dinner isn't just about food. It's about timing, tone, habits, expectations, even silence. And every one of those things carries meaning. The night I finally understood this wasn't special. No celebration. No guests. Just a regular weekday. We sat down, like always. Plates ready. Our child excited, talking about something from school, switching between languages like it was a game. And then, it started. Not a fight. A mismatch. She liked eating while talking. Sharing stories. Asking questions mid-bite. For her, dinner was connection time. A space to open up, laugh, react, stay engaged. I was quieter. In my world, meals were calmer. You eat first. Talk later. Respect the moment. Don't interrupt too much. Don't speak with your mouth full. Don't turn dinner into noise. So while she was asking, "How was your day?" I was still chewing. And by the time I answered, the moment had already moved on. Now here's the part that's easy to miss. Neither of us thought we were doing anything unusual. We were both just being normal. But normal is not universal. It's cultural. And culture shows up strongest in the smallest routines. Like dinner. She asked again, a little louder this time, "Did anything interesting happen today?" I answered, "Not really." Short. Simple. Honest. But in her ears, it sounded like distance. Like I didn't want to share. Like I was closing off. And suddenly, the energy shifted. Not dramatically. Just slightly. But enough to feel it. That's the thing about emotional tension. It doesn't need a big moment. It grows in small shifts. There's actually a concept in communication psychology called emotional attunement. It's the ability to match each other's emotional rhythm, tone, pace, engagement. When that rhythm is off, even normal conversations feel uncomfortable. That night, our rhythm was off. She leaned forward. Asked more questions. Tried to pull me into the conversation. I leaned back. Answered briefly. Tried to stay neutral. She interpreted that as lack of interest. I experienced her effort as pressure. And just like that, dinner became work. Not connection. Work. Our child, of course, didn't notice any of this. Still laughing. Still talking. Moving easily between both of us, like a bridge we hadn't fully learned how to cross. And that contrast hit me hard. Because what felt complicated for us felt effortless for a child. Why? Because children don't carry fixed expectations of how things should be. They adapt. Adults compare. We compare what's happening now with what we're used to. And when it doesn't match, discomfort appears. That's what I was feeling. Not because anything was wrong, but because it wasn't familiar. Later that evening, something small happened that changed how I saw everything. She said, "Dinner feels quiet lately." Not angry. Not accusing. Just noticing. And my first instinct? Defend. I'm just tired. Logical. Reasonable. But incomplete. Because underneath that answer was something I hadn't said out loud yet. I don't know how to match your energy. And that's a much harder sentence to say. Because it requires vulnerability. It requires admitting you don't have control. That you're not as adaptable as you thought. So instead, I stayed quiet. Again. But this time, I paid attention to what that silence was doing. Not protecting me. Creating distance. There's a pattern in relationships that's easy to fall into, especially when language or culture is involved. One person reaches out more. The other pulls back slightly. The first person reaches even more. The second pulls back further. Not because they don't care, but because the effort feels mismatched. That's exactly where we were. And dinner was where it showed up most clearly. The next day, I tried something different. Not a big change. Just a small experiment. At dinner, before she asked anything, I spoke first. Today was actually kind of strange, I said. Simple sentence. Not perfect. But real. She paused. Looked at me. Interested. And I continued. Slowly. Not searching for perfect words. Just describing what I could. And something shifted. The conversation didn't feel forced. It flowed. Not perfectly. But naturally. Because I had stepped into the rhythm, instead of waiting to be pulled into it. That moment taught me something important. Connection isn't just about responding. It's about initiating. Especially when the other person expects a different rhythm than you. There's also something else happening in these moments that most people overlook. Your brain is constantly asking, is this safe? Is this comfortable? And when something feels unfamiliar, even if it's not dangerous, your brain creates resistance. That resistance shows up as withdrawal. Short answers. Less engagement. Not because you want distance, but because your brain is trying to conserve energy. That's why mixed culture interactions can feel exhausting. Not because they're negative, but because they require constant adjustment. And adjustment takes effort. But here's the shift that changed everything for me. Instead of asking, why is this so hard? I started asking, what is this trying to teach me? Dinner wasn't the problem. It was the mirror. Showing me where I was rigid. where I was holding on to habits that didn't serve connection anymore. And once I saw that, I had a choice. Stay comfortable or grow. That night, I leaned in again. Asked her a question. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand her rhythm. And something subtle but powerful happened. She relaxed. Not because I changed completely, but because I moved, just enough. That's the key. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to meet halfway. Because in a mixed culture family, connection doesn't come from sameness. It comes from flexibility, from curiosity, from choosing to understand, even when it feels unnatural at first. Dinner didn't become perfect overnight, but it became lighter. Less effort, more presence. And I realized something I hadn't seen before. Maybe the table wasn't dividing us. Maybe it was inviting us to learn each other in a way we never had before. And once you accept that invitation, even the smallest moments start to feel different. Not easier, but more meaningful. Because now, you're not just eating together. You're building something. One conversation at a time. The fight we didn't expect. What if the moment that almost breaks your relationship starts with something so small, you don't even take it seriously at first? That's exactly how it happened to us. No big issue. No deep topic. No serious disagreement. Just a plan for the weekend. It sounds almost ridiculous when you say it out loud. But if you've ever been in a mixed culture relationship, you already know, small things don't stay small for long. It was a Saturday morning. No rush. No pressure. The kind of day that should feel easy. She said, we should go out today. Maybe take our child somewhere fun. Simple. Positive. Harmless. In her tone, it was excitement. A suggestion filled with energy. In my mind, it felt like a decision already made. And I didn't even realize I was reacting to that feeling. So I answered, I think staying home is better today. Still calm. Still normal. But underneath that sentence, there was something else. Control. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just a quiet need to slow things down. Now here's where things shifted. She paused. That pause was short, but heavy. And then she said, why do you always avoid going out? That word, always, hit harder than it should have. Because suddenly, this wasn't about today anymore. It became a pattern. A judgment. And my brain reacted instantly. Defense mode. I don't always avoid it, I said. I just want a calm day. Logical. But not what she heard. What she heard was resistance. Distance. Maybe even rejection of something she cared about. And just like that, the energy changed. You know that moment when a conversation crosses an invisible line? When it stops being about the topic, and starts being about something deeper? We had just crossed that line. The voices got slightly louder. Not shouting. but sharper, faster, less careful. She said, "You never want to do things together." I said, "That's not true." She said, "Then why does it feel like that?" And that question didn't have a quick answer. Because it wasn't about facts. It was about feelings. And feelings don't follow logic. Here's where culture quietly stepped in again. In her perspective, shared activities meant connection. Going out, doing things together, creating memories. That's how you build a relationship. In mine, being together, even quietly, at home, already was connection. No need to prove it with activity. Two definitions of the same word. Together. But they didn't match. And when definitions don't match, frustration grows. There's a psychological concept called meaning mismatch. It happens when two people use the same words or actions, but attach different meanings to them. And that mismatch is one of the fastest ways to create conflict. Because both people feel misunderstood. And both people feel right. That's exactly where we were. The conversation moved faster now. Less listening. More reacting. I could feel my heart beating quicker. Not from anger, but from pressure. From that familiar feeling of not having the right words fast enough. Of trying to explain something complex, in a language that slows you down. So instead of explaining clearly, I simplified. Too much. I just want peace, I said. That sentence was honest. But incomplete. Because what I didn't say was, I feel overwhelmed sometimes. I don't know how to match your energy. I'm afraid of disappointing you. But those thoughts stayed inside. And what came out sounded like withdrawal. Which triggered something in her. Peace doesn't mean avoiding everything, she said. And now we weren't talking about the weekend anymore. We were talking about how we handle life. And that's when it happened. The moment that changed everything. She went quiet. Not calm. Not relaxed. Just silent. And if you've ever experienced that kind of silence, you know, it's not empty. It's full. Full of thoughts. Emotions. Distance. And suddenly, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Fear. Because arguments are loud, but silence? Silence feels like something is slipping away. There's research showing that emotional withdrawal during conflict is one of the strongest predictors of relationship breakdown over time. Not because of the disagreement itself, but because of the disconnection it creates. And in that moment, I felt that disconnection. Clearly. For the first time, I stopped thinking about being right. And started thinking about what was actually happening. This wasn't about going out. This wasn't about staying home. This was about feeling connected. Or not. And I realized something uncomfortable. I had been trying to win small moments. While slowly losing something much bigger. Connection doesn't break in one big event. It fades in repeated misunderstandings. In moments where both people feel unheard. Unseen. unfelt. And I didn't want that. So instead of continuing the argument, I did something different. Something simple, but difficult. I slowed down. Not my words. My reaction. And I said, I think we're talking about two different things. That sentence changed the direction. Not instantly. But enough. She looked at me. Still quiet. But listening. And for the first time in that conversation, I didn't try to defend. I tried to explain. Slowly. Imperfectly. I don't avoid going out, I said. Sometimes I just feel tired in a way I don't know how to explain quickly. The words weren't perfect. But they were real. And real is what creates space. There was a pause. But this time, it felt different. Not heavy. Open. And she said something softer. Then tell me that. Simple. But powerful. Because it revealed the real issue. Not the plan. Not the difference. But the lack of clear emotional expression. We weren't failing because we disagreed. We were struggling because we didn't fully understand what was underneath the disagreement. And that's the trap. Most arguments aren't about what they appear to be. They're about unmet needs, unclear signals, and emotional gaps. And in mixed culture relationships, those gaps are easier to fall into. But here's the part that changed everything for me. That fight didn't break us. It revealed us. It showed us where we were out of sync. Where we needed to adjust. Where we needed to listen, not just to words, but to meaning. And once you see that, conflict stops being something to avoid. And becomes something to learn from. That day didn't end perfectly. But it ended, honestly. And sometimes, that's more important. Because the strongest relationships aren't the ones without conflict. They're the ones that learn how to move through it, without losing each other in the process. And that was the moment I started to understand something deeper. Differences don't destroy relationships. Misunderstood differences do. And once you begin to understand them, even a fight can bring you closer. Silence isn't always peace. What if the calm in your relationship isn't peace at all, but just two people slowly giving up on being understood? That realization didn't hit during an argument. It came in the quiet. The kind of quiet that feels safe at first. Comfortable. Easy. No tension. No conflict. No emotional risk. The kind of quiet most people think they want. And for a while, I thought I wanted it too. After that unexpected fight about the weekend, things changed, but not in a dramatic way. We didn't suddenly become better communicators. We didn't solve everything overnight. We just became quieter. More careful. More controlled. Fewer disagreements. Fewer misunderstandings. At least on the surface. But something else disappeared too. Spontaneity. Curiosity. That natural back and forth that makes a relationship feel alive. Instead, conversations became efficient. Did you eat? Yes. Do we need groceries? Maybe. What time tomorrow? Same as usual. Everything worked. But nothing connected. And here's the dangerous part. When things don't feel obviously broken, you stop trying to fix them. You adapt. You accept. You tell yourself, this is normal. This is adult life. This is what stability looks like. But deep down, something feels off. Like a song playing without bass. The melody is there, but the depth is missing. That's what our relationship started to feel like. Functional. But flat. There's a psychological pattern called emotional minimization. It happens when people reduce emotional expression, not because they don't feel, but because expressing feels too complicated, too risky, or too exhausting. And that was exactly what I was doing. Not because I didn't care, but because every emotional conversation felt like work. Finding the right words. Choosing the right tone. Avoiding misunderstanding. It was easier to stay neutral. To stay safe. To stay quiet. And silence, at first, feels like control. No conflict means no mistakes, right? But silence has a hidden cost. It removes friction, but it also removes depth. Because connection doesn't grow in perfect conditions. It grows in imperfect, messy, sometimes uncomfortable moments where two people try, and fail, and try again to understand each other. Without that, things slowly fade. I remember one night very clearly. We were sitting in the same room. Not arguing. Not distracted. Just existing. She was on her phone. I was looking at something else. No tension. No problem. But also, no connection. And suddenly, I had this strange thought. If someone walked into this room right now, they would think everything is fine. And that thought didn't comfort me. It bothered me. Because it was true. Everything looked fine. But it didn't feel fine. That's when I started questioning something I hadn't questioned before. Was I avoiding conflict? Or avoiding effort? Because real communication, even in your own language, is not easy. It requires attention. Patience. Vulnerability. Now add a second language. Add cultural differences. Add different emotional habits. Of course it feels harder. But avoiding that difficulty doesn't remove it. It just delays it. There's research showing that couples who avoid conflict entirely don't necessarily have stronger relationships. In fact, over time, they often feel less connected, because important emotions never get expressed, processed, or resolved. And I could feel that happening. Not dramatically, but gradually. Like a slow fade. So one night, I decided to do something uncomfortable. Not big. Just honest. I said, "Do you feel like we've been quieter lately?" That sentence alone took effort. Not because of the words, but because of what it opened. She looked at me. Paused. and said, "Yeah." No defensiveness. No confusion. Just agreement. And that moment surprised me. Because in my head, I had built this idea that bringing things up would create tension. But instead, it created space. Space for something real. We didn't suddenly have a deep, perfect conversation. But we started talking. Slowly. Carefully. Not about problems. About feelings. She said, "Sometimes I don't know if you're okay or just not saying anything." And that sentence hit harder than any argument we had before. Because it revealed something I hadn't seen clearly. My silence wasn't neutral. It was confusing. Unclear. Distant. Not because I meant it that way. But because that's how it felt on the other side. And that's the truth about communication. Intent doesn't always match impact. You can mean peace. And create distance. You can avoid conflict. And still cause disconnection. That's when I realized something simple, but powerful. Silence only works when both people understand it the same way. Otherwise, it becomes a gap. And gaps grow. So I started making small changes. Not dramatic conversations. Just small signals. Saying what I was feeling, even if it was simple. "I'm a bit tired today. I feel off, not sure why. I just need a quiet moment, but I'm okay." Short sentences. But clear. And clarity reduces confusion. Over time, something shifted. The silence didn't disappear. But it changed. It became comfortable again. Not empty. Not heavy. Just shared. Because now, it wasn't hiding anything. That's the difference. Silence can be peaceful. But only when it's not replacing something that needs to be said. There's also something interesting that happens when you start expressing more, even in simple ways. Your confidence grows. Not just in language. In presence. You stop waiting for perfect words. And start trusting that imperfect words are enough. That shift matters. Because in real life, no one speaks perfectly all the time. What matters is whether people can feel you. Understand your intention. Connect with your meaning. And that doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. Looking back, I understand something I didn't see before. I wasn't protecting the relationship by staying quiet. I was slowly reducing it. Making it smaller. Safer. But also, less alive. And once you see that, you can't go back to thinking silence is always the answer. Because sometimes, silence isn't peace. It's just the absence of connection. Waiting for someone to bring it back. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I decided I didn't want to wait anymore. Learning to speak, slowly. What if the real breakthrough in your relationship doesn't come from saying more, but from finally learning how to say less, more honestly? That idea sounded strange to me at first. Because when people talk about improving communication, they usually mean more words, better vocabulary, clearer explanations. But what I was starting to realize was the opposite. The problem wasn't that I didn't have enough words. It was that I was using them the wrong way. Too fast in my head. Too slow in real life. Too filtered before they even came out. So after everything, the quiet distance, the small conflicts, the invisible misunderstandings, I decided to try something different. Not bigger. Not smarter. Just slower. And I don't mean speaking English slowly like a classroom exercise. I mean slowing down the entire process of communication. The thinking. The reacting. The responding. Because here's something most people don't realize. When you're speaking in a second language, your brain is doing multiple jobs at the same time. Understanding meaning. Translating. Checking grammar. Predicting reactions. Adjusting tone. That's a lot. And when your brain is overloaded, it does what it always does. It simplifies. Short answers. Less emotion. More silence. Not because you don't care, but because your system is trying to keep up. So I stopped trying to keep up. And started trying to stay present. The first time I noticed the difference was during something very ordinary. She asked, "How was your day?" Normally, I would answer quickly. Good. Busy. Normal. End of conversation. But this time, I paused. Not a long pause. Just enough to actually feel the question. And I said, slowly, it was a bit stressful, actually. Not perfect. Not detailed. But real. And that changed everything. Because real answers create real conversations. She looked at me differently. More engaged. More present. And she asked, what happened? Now here's where the old habit would usually return. I would try to explain everything clearly, perfectly, efficiently. And then get stuck halfway. But this time, I didn't try to be perfect. I just spoke, step by step. Simple sentences. Small pieces. I had a meeting, and I didn't fully understand something. Pause. But I didn't ask again. Pause. And later, I realized I misunderstood. That's it. No complex structure. No perfect grammar. Just honest fragments. And something unexpected happened. She understood me. Not just the situation. The feeling. That's when it clicked. Communication isn't about building perfect sentences. It's about building clear meaning. And clear meaning doesn't need complexity. It needs honesty and timing. There's actually a concept in neuroscience called processing fluency. It means the easier something is to understand, the more positively your brain responds to it. Simple, clear communication feels better than complex, perfect communication. And that's exactly what I was experiencing. The slower I spoke, the clearer things became. Not just for her. For me. Because slowing down gave me space to actually understand what I was feeling before trying to express it. That's something I had been skipping. Going straight from reaction to explanation, without pausing in between. And that pause? That's where clarity lives. I started applying this everywhere. Not just in conversations. In reactions. In conflicts. In daily moments. When she said something that felt uncomfortable, instead of reacting immediately, I gave myself a second. Not to avoid, but to process. And that 1-second pause changed the tone of everything. Because most misunderstandings don't come from what we say. They come from how fast we react. There's a psychological pattern called emotional reactivity. It's your brain responding instantly based on habit, not reflection. Slowing down interrupts that pattern. It creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you get choice. Choice to respond differently. More clearly. More intentionally. I also noticed something else. When I spoke slower, she adjusted too. Her tone softened. Her pace slowed. The whole interaction became calmer. More aligned. It's like conversation has a rhythm. And whoever changes the rhythm first, influences the entire flow. Before, I was trying to match her speed. Now, I was inviting her into mine. Not forcing. Just setting a tone. And over time, that tone became shared. Even our child seemed to reflect it. Less rushed conversations. More listening. More space. And that space made everything feel lighter. There was another unexpected benefit. My confidence started to grow. Not because my English suddenly improved. But because I stopped fearing mistakes. When you speak fast, mistakes feel bigger. More visible. More stressful. But when you speak slowly, mistakes become part of the flow. Not interruptions. Just small adjustments. And people respond to that energy. They don't focus on your grammar. They focus on your presence. Your intention. Your clarity. That shift is powerful. Because it changes the goal. From speaking perfectly to connecting honestly. And once that becomes your goal, everything else starts to fall into place. I also began to understand something deeper about mixed culture communication. It's not about finding one correct way to speak. It's about creating a shared way. A rhythm that belongs to both of you. And that rhythm doesn't come from speed. It comes from awareness. From small adjustments. From choosing to understand, not just respond. Looking back, I can see the difference clearly. Before, I was trying to keep up with the conversation. Now, I was shaping it. Gently. Slowly. Intentionally. And the relationship started to feel different. Not because problems disappeared. But because communication became easier. Not effortless. But manageable. Human. Real. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. Maybe I didn't need better English to fix my relationship. Maybe I just needed a better way to use the English I already had. Slower. Simpler. More honest. Because in the end, people don't connect through perfect sentences. They connect through moments that feel real. And sometimes, all it takes to create those moments is the courage to slow down. Raising kids between two worlds. What if your child understands your partner better than you do, and becomes the bridge you didn't even realize you needed? That thought hit me one afternoon in the most ordinary place. A living room filled with toys, half-finished snacks, and the quiet chaos that every parent knows too well. Our child was sitting on the floor, talking non-stop, switching between two languages so naturally that it didn't even feel like switching. One sentence in English. The next with words from my culture. Then back again. No hesitation. No overthinking. No fear of getting it wrong. Just flow. And I sat there, watching that, feeling something I couldn't fully explain at first. Pride, yes. But also, something deeper. A question. How is this so easy for you, and so complicated for me? Because if you've ever tried to balance two cultures in one home, you know, it's not just about language. It's about values, habits, expectations. What feels right? What feels strange? And when you become a parent in that environment, everything becomes more intense. Because now, it's not just about understanding each other. It's about deciding what your child learns. And that's where things get complicated. Not loudly, but quietly. In daily decisions. That day, it started with something small. Our child refused to finish their food. Nothing unusual. But the way we reacted was very different. In my instinct, I said, "You should finish your food. Don't waste it." Firm. Direct. Familiar. That's how I was raised. Food is respect. Effort. Gratitude. But she responded differently. "It's okay, you don't have to finish if you're full." Calm. Gentle. Flexible. And just like that, two systems appeared in one moment. Not conflicting loudly. But clearly different. I looked at her. She looked at me. And for a second, there was that familiar feeling again. Mismatch. Now imagine being the child in that moment. Two parents. Two messages. Both calm. Both loving. But not the same. That's what raising kids between two cultures looks like. Not confusion. But dual signals. And here's the interesting part. Children don't immediately see that as a problem. Adults do. Because we're the ones trying to make things consistent. Predictable. Correct. But children? They adapt. There's research showing that children growing up in bilingual or bicultural environments develop higher cognitive flexibility. Their brains are better at switching between rules, perspectives, and patterns. In simple terms, They don't get stuck as easily. They adjust. That's exactly what I was watching. Our child looked at both of us, paused, and then said, "I'm full." Not defensive. Not confused. Just clear. And in that moment, something clicked. Maybe the goal isn't to make everything the same. Maybe the goal is to help them navigate differences. But that realization didn't come easily. Because part of me still wanted control. Consistency. A clear system. That night, we talked about it. Not as an argument, but as a question. How do we raise our child, without confusing them? And that question doesn't have a simple answer. Because it's not just about rules. It's about identity. Culture shapes how you see the world. And when two cultures exist in one home, the child doesn't just learn behaviors. They learn perspectives. Multiple ways of thinking. And that can feel powerful, or overwhelming. Depending on how it's handled. At first, I thought we needed to choose. One way. One system. One right approach. But the more I observed, the more I realized something unexpected. Our child wasn't struggling. We were. Because we were trying to simplify something that is naturally complex. And complexity isn't always a problem. Sometimes, it's an advantage. There was a moment a few days later that changed how I saw everything. Our child was playing and suddenly asked a question. "Why do you say it like that, and Mom says it different?" Simple. Curious. No judgment. Just noticing. And instead of correcting or explaining quickly, I paused. And said, "Because we learned it in different ways." That answer felt small. But it opened something. Our child nodded. Accepted it. Moved on. No confusion. No stress. And that's when I understood something important. Children don't need perfect consistency. They need clear context. They need to understand why things are different. Not be forced into one version. That changed how I approached everything. Instead of correcting differences, I started explaining them. This is how I learned. This is how your mom learned. Both are okay. And slowly, the tension I felt around these moments started to disappear. Because I stopped seeing differences as a problem to fix. And started seeing them as something to share. There's also another layer to this. Language. Because language isn't just communication. It's identity. It carries emotion, memory, connection. And when your child moves between languages, they're not just switching words. They're switching perspectives. And that's powerful. But it also requires something from you. Patience. Acceptance. Letting go of control. Because your child might express something more easily in one language than another. Might connect differently depending on context. And that's okay. In fact, that's the strength. Looking back, I realized I was trying to protect our child from confusion. But what I was really doing was limiting flexibility. And flexibility is exactly what they need. Because the world they're growing up in is not simple. It's layered, cultural, diverse. And if they can learn to navigate that at home, they're already stronger than most. That's when the title question started to feel more real to me. Can differences become your strength? Not just in relationships, but in parenting, in identity, in everyday life. And the answer wasn't something I read. It was something I started to see. Right in front of me. In a child who didn't see conflict. Only options. Only ways to connect. Only ways to understand. And maybe that's the lesson we were supposed to learn all along. Not how to eliminate differences, but how to live with them without fear. Because when you stop trying to control every difference, you start discovering something unexpected. They don't divide your family. They expand it. 2 languages, 1 heart. What if the thing you're afraid will confuse your child is actually the thing that will make them stronger than you ever were? That question stayed in my mind longer than I expected. Because even after everything I had started to understand about culture, communication, differences, there was still one quiet fear I hadn't fully faced. What if we're making it harder for our child? Not in a dramatic way, but in those small, everyday moments where nothing feels completely aligned. 2 languages. 2 ways of thinking. 2 emotional systems. And 1 child trying to live inside all of it. It sounds beautiful when people say bilingual or bicultural. But living it feels more complicated. At least for adults. For children, it depends on how we guide them. That realization came to me one evening that looked completely normal. We were sitting together, talking about school. Our child was telling a story, switching between languages again, naturally, effortlessly. And then suddenly, they stopped mid-sentence. Paused. Looked at me. And asked, "How do I say this, in your way?" That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was difficult, but because of what it revealed. They weren't confused. They were aware. Aware that there are multiple ways to express the same idea. And instead of choosing one, they were learning how to move between them. That's not confusion. That's intelligence. There's a concept in cognitive science called code switching. It refers to the ability to shift between languages or communication styles depending on context. And people who develop this skill early often show stronger executive function, better focus, better problem solving, better adaptability. In simple terms, their brains get better at handling complexity. And suddenly, the thing I was worried about started to look like an advantage. But here's the important part. That advantage doesn't appear automatically. It depends on the environment. On how the child experiences those differences. If differences feel like conflict, they create stress. If differences feel accepted, they create strength. That's the line. And we, as parents, are the ones shaping it. I started noticing how small reactions mattered more than big decisions. When our child mixed languages, did I correct them? Or did I respond naturally? When they asked, which one is right, did I choose one? Or did I explain both? Those moments shape identity. More than rules. More than lessons. More than anything structured. Because identity isn't taught. It's absorbed. One evening, something happened that made this even clearer. Our child was talking to both of us at the same time. Switching language depending on who they were looking at. English with her. My language with me. Back and forth. Smooth. Effortless. And then suddenly, they laughed and said, I can talk to both of you at the same time. That moment felt small. But it wasn't. It was a realization. For them. And for me. Because what I saw in that moment wasn't confusion. It was connection. They weren't divided between two worlds. They were connecting them. And that changed everything. Because I had been looking at it the wrong way. I thought we were giving our child two different systems to manage. But in reality, we were giving them more tools. More ways to understand. More ways to relate. And that only becomes a problem if we make it one. There's also something deeper happening in these situations. Language carries emotion. Certain feelings are easier to express in one language than another. Certain memories feel stronger depending on how they're described. And when a child has access to multiple languages, they have access to multiple emotional pathways. That's powerful. But it also requires awareness. Because sometimes, a child might switch language not because they're confused, but because they're trying to express something more accurately, more comfortably. And if we force consistency, we might accidentally block expression. That's something I had to learn. To listen beyond the language. To focus on the meaning. Not the form. There was a moment when our child said something simple. I like talking like this. It feels easy. That word, easy, stayed with me. Because for a long time, I thought this kind of environment would feel complicated for them. But it didn't. It felt natural. The complication was in my expectations. Not in their experience. That's when I started letting go of another belief. The idea that everything needs to be clearly defined. Clearly separated. Clearly structured. Because real life doesn't work like that. Especially not in a mixed culture family. Life overlaps. Blends. Adapts. And children are incredibly good at navigating that, if we don't interrupt the process. I also noticed something else. As our child became more comfortable switching between languages and perspectives, they started understanding us better. Not just what we said, but how we felt. They could sense when I was quiet in a certain way, or when her tone meant something more than the words. Because they had learned to read layers, not just sentences. And that's a skill many adults struggle with. All because they grew up in one consistent system. But here, in this mixed environment, Our child was developing it naturally. That's when the fear completely shifted. From, what if this is confusing? To, what if this is exactly what they need? Because the world they're growing up in isn't simple. It's diverse. Fast-changing. Full of different perspectives. And the ability to move between those perspectives isn't just useful. It's essential. And maybe that's the real strength of raising a mixed-culture family in America. Not just learning to accept differences, but learning to use them to build something richer, more flexible, more connected. And once I saw that, everything felt lighter. I stopped trying to simplify everything. Stopped trying to make it one way. And started trusting the process. Trusting that our child wasn't lost between two worlds. They were building a bridge. And standing right in the middle of it. Comfortably. Confidently. Naturally. And maybe the most surprising part of all was realizing that the bridge they were building was also helping us meet each other in ways we never could before. Differences became our strength. What if the thing you've been trying to fix this whole time was never the problem, but the advantage you didn't know how to use yet? That question didn't come to me all at once. It built slowly. Through quiet moments. Through small shifts. Through watching the same differences that once created tension start to create something else. Something stronger. Something unexpected. Because for a long time, I believed what most people believe. That harmony means similarity. That the closer two people are in habits, thinking, and expression, the easier the relationship becomes. And in some ways, that's true. But what I was starting to see was something deeper. Similarity makes things easier. Differences make things grow. And growth is what creates strength. Not comfort. Not routine. Strength. But here's the part nobody tells you. Differences only become strength when you stop fighting them. That shift didn't happen in a big moment. It happened in patterns. In repeated situations where we could either react the old way or try something new. One of those moments came back at the dinner table, the same place that used to feel like a quiet battlefield. But this time, something was different. She started telling a story. Fast. Expressive. Animated. Before, I might have stayed quiet, waited for the right moment to respond. But now, I leaned in. Not perfectly. Not smoothly. But intentionally. I interrupted, not to stop her, but to join her. That reminds me of something, I said. Simple. But active. And instead of feeling like I was breaking a rhythm, it felt like I was entering it. She didn't pull back. She smiled. Continued. And suddenly, the conversation wasn't two different styles colliding. It was two styles, blending. That's when I realized something powerful. We didn't need to match each other. We needed to complement each other. There's a concept in psychology called complementarity. It means differences can actually enhance interaction, if both sides adapt slightly. Not by becoming the same, but by adjusting just enough to connect. That's what was happening. She still spoke with energy. I still spoke more slowly. But now, there was awareness. Timing. Space. Instead of forcing one style to win, we were building a shared rhythm. And that rhythm felt natural. Another moment came during a stressful day. Something went wrong. Unexpected. Frustrating. Before, this would have been a perfect setup for misunderstanding. Different reactions. Different coping styles. More tension. But this time, something shifted. She reacted quickly. Took action. Tried to fix the situation immediately. That's her strength. I reacted differently. Slower. Observing. Trying to understand before acting. That's mine. Before, these differences felt like conflict. Now, they felt like balance. She moved fast when needed. I slowed things down when needed. Together, we covered more ground than either of us could alone. And that's when the idea became clear. Differences aren't weaknesses. They're missing pieces. But only if you allow them to fit together. Otherwise, they just feel like obstacles. That shift changed how I saw everything. Not just communication. Not just parenting. But the entire relationship. Even the things that used to frustrate me, started to make sense. Her directness. Clarity. My hesitation. Reflection. Her energy. Momentum. My calm. Stability. Individually, those traits can feel limiting. Together, they create balance. That's the part most people miss. We don't need to remove our differences to succeed in a relationship. We need to understand how they work together. But that requires one thing. Letting go of the idea that your way is the default. Because as long as you believe your way is normal, everything else feels like a deviation. Like something to correct. And that mindset blocks growth. I had to unlearn that. Slowly. Through experience. Through mistakes. Through moments where I realized, the problem wasn't her approach. It was my resistance to it. Once that resistance softened, everything else became easier. Not effortless. But smoother. More flexible. More open. Even conflicts changed. They didn't disappear. But they became less threatening. Because now, a disagreement didn't feel like something was breaking. It felt like something was being revealed. A difference. A perspective. An opportunity to understand something new. And that changes how you respond. From defense. To curiosity. From reaction. To exploration. There's also something interesting that happens when you start seeing differences this way. You stop trying to win small moments. And start focusing on long-term connection. Because being right feels good for a second. But being understood lasts much longer. And understanding grows when differences are explored, not avoided. I also noticed this shift in our child. The way they moved between us. The way they responded to both styles. The way they didn't choose one over the other, but used both. That's when it became undeniable. This wasn't a problem to solve. It was a system to develop. A way of living that's not about reducing complexity, but managing it, using it, growing through it. And that's where the real strength is. Because in a world that's becoming more connected, more diverse, more unpredictable, the ability to handle differences isn't optional. It's essential. And we were building that ability, every day. At home. In small conversations. In quiet adjustments. In moments that used to feel difficult, but now felt meaningful. Looking back, I can see the turning point clearly. It wasn't when we fixed communication. It wasn't when we stopped arguing. It was when we stopped seeing differences as something negative, and started seeing them as something useful. Because once that shift happens, everything changes. The same situation feels different. The same conversation flows differently. The same relationship becomes stronger. Not because it's simpler, but because it's deeper. More aware. More intentional. And that's when the question from the beginning finally had an answer. Can differences become your strength? Yes. But only when you stop trying to make everything the same. And start learning how to make everything work together. Because strength doesn't come from uniformity. It comes from integration. From balance. From the ability to take what's different and turn it into something that actually moves you forward. Together. Real English in real life. What if the fastest way to improve your English is not studying more, but finally living it, imperfectly, in the moments that actually matter? That idea sounds uncomfortable, right? Because most people, including me, for a long time, believe the opposite. You study first. You practice. You prepare. And then you speak. But real life doesn't follow that order. Real life throws you into conversations before you feel ready. And if you keep waiting to be ready, you never really start. That's exactly what I was doing. Even after everything I had learned about communication, culture, and connection, there was still a part of me holding back. Still editing. Still thinking, this sentence isn't good enough. Still choosing silence over imperfection. But something had changed. Not in my vocabulary. In my mindset. Because now, I understood something I didn't before. English wasn't the goal. Connection was. And once that became clear, the way I used English started to change. Not dramatically, but consistently. In small, real-life moments. It started at home. Not in a classroom. Not with exercises. Just daily conversations. Simple things. What do you want to eat? How was your day? Can you help me with this? But instead of rushing through them, I paid attention to tone, to timing, to meaning. Because real English, the kind that actually builds relationships, is not about complex words. It's about clarity, emotion, presence. There's a reason why native speakers often use simple language in real conversations. Not because they lack vocabulary, but because simple language connects faster. And connection is the point. I remember one moment clearly. Our child asked me a question. A simple one. Before, I might have answered quickly, with the shortest possible sentence. But this time, I expanded it. Not with complexity. With feeling. I think it's a good idea, because it makes people feel comfortable. That sentence wasn't perfect. But it had meaning. And more importantly, it had intention. And that's what people respond to. Not perfection. Intention. There's a concept in language learning called comprehensible input. It means you learn best when you understand most of what you hear, even if some parts are new. But there's another side to it that people don't talk about enough. Comprehensible output. The idea that you learn by expressing ideas that are slightly beyond your current ability. Not too hard. Not too easy. Just a little stretch. That's where growth happens. And real life is full of those moments. Every conversation is an opportunity. Not to be perfect, but to stretch. To try. To adjust. To learn. I started treating daily life like that. Not as a test, but as practice. Low pressure. Real. Human. When I didn't know a word, I described it. When I made a mistake, I continued. When I felt unsure, I slowed down. And something interesting happened. People didn't focus on my mistakes. They focused on my meaning. Because that's what communication is. Meaning transfer. Not grammar performance. This shift removed a lot of pressure. Because pressure comes from the fear of being judged. But when you realize most people just want to understand you, that fear starts to fade. I also noticed something else. My listening improved. Not because I practiced listening exercises, but because I was more engaged. More present. When you care about the conversation, your brain pays more attention. Picks up more details. Understands more context. That's how real listening develops. Not through repetition alone, but through connection. There's also a psychological factor here. When you associate a language with real emotions, family, love, daily life, your brain retains it better. Because emotion strengthens memory. That's why you remember conversations that matter. More than random sentences from a textbook. And in a mixed culture family, those emotional moments happen every day. If you choose to engage with them, instead of avoiding them. I started to see English not as a separate skill, but as part of my life. Something I use to express who I am. Not something I perform to prove something. That shift is important. Because performance creates pressure. Expression creates freedom. And freedom is what allows you to improve naturally. Even mistakes started to feel different. Less like failures. More like adjustments. Small corrections that help you get closer to clarity. And the more I accepted that, the faster I improved. Without forcing it. Without stress. Just through living. There's also something powerful about learning English this way in a mixed culture family. Because you're not just learning the language. You're learning the context. How people think. How they react. What certain phrases really mean beyond the words. That kind of understanding can't be learned from books alone. It comes from interaction. From observation. From experience. And once you have that, your communication becomes more natural. More intuitive. More effective. Looking back, I realize I spent too much time trying to prepare for conversations. Instead of just having them. Trying to avoid mistakes. Instead of learning from them. Trying to sound perfect. Instead of being real. And that slowed me down. Not because I lacked ability. But because I limited my practice. Now, everything is practice. Every day. Every moment. Every interaction. And that's what makes it sustainable. Because you're not adding something new to your life. You're using what's already there. Your family. Your conversations. Your experiences. And turning them into learning opportunities. Without pressure. Without structure. Just, naturally. And that's when it finally made sense. The title I had been thinking about. Real English Story Practice. Not practice through stories. But practice through your own story. Your real life. Your real emotions. Your real conversations. Because that's where language becomes meaningful. And when language becomes meaningful, it becomes yours. Not something you memorize. Something you live. And once you reach that point, you don't ask, how do I improve my English? You ask something much more powerful. How do I express myself more clearly today? And that question will take you further than any textbook ever could. A family that finally feels right. What if the life you've been trying to fix was never broken, just waiting for you to see it differently? That question feels simple. But it took me a long time to understand it. Because for so long, I believed happiness would come when things became easier. When communication felt natural. When differences stopped creating tension. When everything finally made sense. But that's not what happened. Things didn't suddenly become easy. They became clear. And clarity changed everything. Not our situation. Our perspective. Now, when I look at our life, the same home, the same routines, the same mix of cultures, I don't see problems waiting to happen. I see systems we've learned how to navigate. I see moments that used to confuse me, now making sense in a different way. I see conversations that used to feel heavy, now flowing more naturally. Not perfectly. but honestly. And that honesty is what makes it feel right. There's a moment I come back to often. Nothing special. Just an ordinary evening. We're all in the same room. Our child talking, laughing, moving between languages like it's second nature. She's responding, engaged, expressive. And I'm there too, not observing from a distance anymore. Not translating in my head. Just, part of it. Fully. Present. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was trying to keep up. I felt like I belonged. That feeling is quiet, but powerful. Because belonging isn't something you can force. It's something you grow into. Through understanding. Through adjustment. Through time. Looking back, I realized something important. We didn't solve every difference. We didn't remove every misunderstanding. We didn't become the same. What we did was learn how to stay connected despite all of that. And that's what makes a relationship strong. Not perfection. Resilience. There's a concept in psychology called secure attachment. It doesn't mean a relationship is free of conflict. It means that even when things are uncertain, both people feel safe enough to return to connection. That's what we built. Not by following rules, but by going through real moments. The awkward conversations. The misunderstandings. The silence. The small efforts. Over and over again. Until something changed. Not dramatically, but deeply. Now, when differences show up, and they still do, we don't panic. We pause. We ask. We listen. Because we've seen what happens when we don't. And more importantly, we've seen what happens when we do. There's also something else that changed. How I see myself. Because in the beginning, I thought I needed to improve. Fix my English. Adapt faster. Be more like her. Fit into the system better. But now, I see it differently. I didn't need to become someone else. I needed to expand who I already was. To add new ways of thinking. New ways of expressing. Without losing my own. That's the balance. Not replacing. Integrating. And that applies to everything. Language. Culture. Identity. Even love. Because love in a mixed culture family isn't just about feeling. It's about understanding how that feeling is expressed differently. And choosing to meet in the middle. Again and again. Until it becomes natural. Our child, in many ways, helped us get there. Not by teaching us directly. But by showing us what's possible. That you can live in two worlds. Without being divided. That you can hold different perspectives. Without conflict. That you can connect across differences. Without fear. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. Differences don't need to be solved. They need to be understood. Because once you understand them, they stop feeling like barriers. And start feeling like opportunities. To grow. To connect. To build something richer than what you expected. If you're watching this right now, maybe you're feeling something similar to what I felt before. Tired. Confused. Maybe even a little disconnected. Not because you don't care, but because it feels harder than it should. And maybe you're wondering if it's supposed to be this way. Here's what I can tell you. It's not supposed to be easy. But it is possible. Not by changing everything at once, but by changing how you see it. How you respond. How you stay present, even when it feels uncomfortable. Because the truth is, you don't need perfect English. You don't need perfect understanding. You don't need a perfect relationship. You just need enough awareness to not give up on connection, even in small moments. Especially in small moments. Because that's where everything is built. Not in big decisions, but in daily choices. To listen a little more. To speak a little more honestly. To pause instead of react. To try again, even when it feels repetitive. Those small things, they add up. They create something stable. Something real. Something that finally feels right. And one day, without even realizing when it happened, you'll look around at your life. And it won't feel confusing anymore. It won't feel like something you're trying to manage. It will feel like something you're living. Fully. Calmly. Confidently. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've learned how to move through it. Together. And that's the moment you realize something simple, but powerful. The differences that once felt like distance are now the reason your family is stronger than ever. What if the life you're struggling to understand right now is actually preparing you for a version of yourself that's stronger, calmer, and finally at peace? If this story felt familiar, even a little, then you're not alone. Every misunderstanding, every quiet moment, every difference you're facing, it's not the end of your connection. It's the beginning of a deeper one, if you're willing to see it differently. This channel is where real life meets real English, slow, clear, emotional stories that help you listen, speak, and think in English naturally while discovering something more important, how to stay connected in a world full of differences. So if you're ready to grow, not just your English, but your mindset, your relationships, and your confidence, this is your place. Subscribe now and don't miss the next story. Because the next one might be exactly what you need to hear.